All right, so these are a couple questions that I got a lot of questions about. So question 1 says, what is the scale factor T? Oh yes, do I have a couple volunteers? I like how somebody already drew a line there. Okay, Anthony is ready to go. You want to try question 1 there, Anthony? Anybody want to try question 2? And even if you mess up, it is okay. I always tell you guys, I actually kind of like that because all right, Dustin, go for it. Question 2. So Anthony, question 1, Dustin, question 2. It's actually kind of nice when you guys mess up because it helps us to point out, okay, like here's definitely a place where you could go wrong, here's why that's wrong, and then most likely you guys won't do it again. So it's a really good learning tool. So don't be shy to get on the whiteboard. And while they're working on it, I'm going to just write up at the top of the board some reminders that we talked about last time, like what T means. So remember, T is the ratio of the one-dimensional, so it could be a side. So you could say aside from shape 1 over the side of shape 2. It could be a height. We'll talk about that here in a second because we'll come back and talk about that question that we started last time and we didn't have time to finish. Okay. T squared, like we're working on in this question, is the ratio of the areas. It could be, and remember too, it could be area 1 over area 2, it could be area 2 over area 1. That part is just going to kind of depend on the context of the problem. And then T cubed is the ratio of the three-dimensional amounts, which are volume. Okay, so very good. Let's see. So Anthony said, yeah, I guess I should have put the answers up because then, sorry, let me put the answers on here for you, Anthony, because then we can talk about why, how we would know to do area 1 over area 2 or area 2 over area 1. Well, if I can get it to copy, come on. There we go. Okay, so here are the answers right here. There's another thing I don't like about this question. They give you both reciprocals. So in this case, see, I don't like that they do that. Anyway, that's not how I would write it. But what they did by default was they put it in their formula in the lesson. They had area 2 over area 1. So if you look at the answers and they have, so a lot of times when we talked about this during last Class Connect, you can look at the answers and you can see that all the answers have the larger number on top. So for example, like 25 over 9, if all the answers had the larger amount in the numerator, then you would automatically know, okay, well, since area 2 is larger, I need to put that in the numerator. And area 1 is smaller, so I would put that in the denominator. However, here they give you 3/5 and 5/3, which are reciprocals of each other, where the larger numbers on the bottom and on the top, depending on what answer you're looking at. So if they give you that situation, then use their default equation where they have area 2 over area 1, which is what Anthony's doing. So that's great. But I wish they would just not be that confusing for you guys, but that's what they're wanting you to do. So Anthony's doing a great job. He wrote out the general formula, which is area 2 over area 1 is equal to T squared. And then he went ahead and plugged in his areas. 375 is area 2, 135 is area 1. And then he divided, which is where the 2.7 is coming from. And then to get, I think this is 1.6, he square rooted. So this is actually, I like that you did this in decimal form, Anthony, because this gives us another topic of discussion, okay? So this is great. This is fine to go ahead and divide the areas and get a decimal. However, if you look at the answers are in fraction form. So how can you figure out, how did you do that, Anthony? How did you know, okay, well, 1.6 was my final answer, and that matched up with 5/3. How, do you guys remember how to do that? How can you figure out if you end up with a decimal and the answers are in fractions, which ones match up? Anybody remember how to do that? Anthony's typing it in, but if you guys remember, go ahead and type it in as well. Good, yes, convert the answers. So in other words, remember to type in the numerator first in your calculator. That's the key. Okay, so if you want to check all these answers, like here, you would take 9 first, hit your divide key, and then 25. Okay, but yeah, if you do that to all of them, if you enter 5, hit the division key, and then 3, you do get 1.6. Okay, now you can certainly keep this in fraction form as well. And 15 would go into each of these. So you could say, okay, 375 divided by 15. So this is an alternate. If you want to keep it in fraction form, you'd say t squared is equal to 25, because 375 divided by 15 is 25. And then do the same thing in the bottom. Divide 135 by 15, and you get 9. And then you can square root, and because 5 times 5 is 25, that's where the square root of 25 is 5. And the square root of 9 is, because 3 times 3 is 9, the square root of 9 is 3. Okay? So there's a couple different ways to do it. You could convert it to decimal, you could keep it as a fraction. Either way, you can get to the right answer. Okay? Does that make more sense on question 1 if you guys had trouble on that one? Because I know I got quite a few questions about that. Is everybody with me on that, or did you guys get lost anywhere? Okay, all right. Well, Dustin and Amelia and Anthony seem to be with me. Everybody else all right? You guys seem kind of quiet today. Okay, good, good. All right, now, oh, are you, Neil? Okay, well, hopefully you can also make sense of this math stuff at the same time. All right, let's take a look at Dustin's work over here. So he did area 2 over area 1 is equal to t squared. And then you plugged in area 2 and area 1. And he simplified. So he said, if I divide 21 by 7, I get 3. And if I divide 84 by 7, I get 12. So this would reduce to 3/12. Okay, so not quite. Let me put the answers up here. That might help us, right? So you don't, oh, well, I see what you did. Okay, so you reduced it. Okay, so you are totally on the right track, Dustin, except that's not t. Okay, so remember up here how your ratio of your areas was t squared? This is actually t squared equals 1/4. So right here, so you're not quite done yet. Now this is a little tricky, but okay, so you have t squared equals 1/4. And so we need a square root to get t. So let's think about this 1/4. How could we figure out what factors of 1, what are some perfect factors of 1? Well, 1 times 1 is actually it. Yes, there you go. What about 4? What are some perfect factors of 4? Yeah, there you go, 2 times 2. So now if you square root that, because you just want t, you're going to get 1/2. Does that make sense? Yep, there you go. You got it. And let's see, since I didn't put the answers up here, yes, that was the correct answer. And so the same thing, they gave you 1/2 as an answer choice and 2, which is 2/1. So they gave you the reciprocals of both, so they want you to just go with area 2 over area 1. Okay? Alrighty, sounds good. Well, let's tackle this problem that we left off with last time. A couple of this one. We'll get to it. You will have extra credit today. So let's see. How far did we get last time? Did we get the scale factor? I think we did. Or maybe we just wrote out, I think we just wrote out the equation. So, oh, and by the way, give Anthony and Dustin a round of applause for that last slide. They did a great job. Excellent job. Thank you for volunteering. I love that. Okay, so it says, just to review, the height of one solid limestone square is 24 meters. Okay, so it was right here. The height here was 24 meters. The height here was 30. And that gave us the volume of the larger pyramid was 16,000 meters cubed. And the volume here, we didn't know, question mark. Okay, and we just, it didn't have it labeled like which one are we going to call figure 1 and figure 2. So we just labeled this first one number 1, I think, right? And then the larger one we called number 2. Oh, well actually I don't know if we did, I don't know. But what we could do, okay, let's read question A. Smaller over larger, okay. And it doesn't really matter, except when you read part A, then it does, okay? So like, if they don't specify it, it's not a huge deal. I mean, it could go larger over smaller or smaller over larger, but in part A it says the scale factor of the smaller to the larger. And so that tells you in part A that we do want smaller over larger, okay? So maybe what we should do is call, just because on that previous example from the 3.11 quiz, if we want to keep things consistent, let's call, I don't want to confuse you guys too much, but let's call the first, the smaller pyramid, let's call that volume 2 and height 2, just because when we set up our ratio, since we're dealing with volumes, we'd have t cubed, we'd have volume 2 over volume 1. If we call our smaller, it's smaller to larger, which is volume 2 is our smaller volume over volume 1. Does that confuse you guys too much? Do you guys see what I'm doing here? And you know, I wouldn't stress out too much about the 1 and the 2 for this particular problem. You definitely need to, as long as this part makes sense, you guys should be all right. So the way question part A reads is that we want the scale factor of the smaller to the larger. So that tells you smaller needs to go in the numerator and larger needs to go in the denominator. That's the key, okay? So here's where it gets a little bit tricky. We definitely know volume 1. So if we just have t cubed equals v2 over v1, a lot of students will write this, which is correct. They'll plug in volume 1, or the larger volume, down in the denominator. And that's, so far so good. Except now, if you try to solve that, what's going to happen? Can you do it? How many things do you not know? How many variables are there that you're like, well, I don't know what they are? Ah, Destin knows what we want to do. Yeah, because right now how we have it written is we have T, which we don't know, and we have the other volume that we don't know. And we can't solve that, right? At least not till you get to Algebra 2. Okay. But we couldn't do it even with Algebra 2 skills here because you have to have another equation. So we wouldn't be able to do it. But yes, Destin remembers, I remember what T stands for. T is the ratio of the one-dimensional amounts. In this case, it's height. So T is height 2 over height 1. So right here, just for this T, that's what I'm going to put in. Height 2 over height 1. That's my substitution for T. Remember, T is still cubed. So that whole thing, height 2 over height 1, is where the is just for T, and then you still have to cube all that. Okay? Now right now you're probably like, well, how did that help me? Because now I have 3 unknowns, but we actually know height 1 and height 2. Okay, so once I plug those in, I'm going to have 24 over 30 cubed equals volume 2 over 16,000. Okay, so let's take a break there and take a second for that to sink in. Take a look at this. I think from here to here is the hardest part. So remember T, okay, T is equal to height, like a height over a height or a side over a side, because look at the units on height. It's just meters, right? That tells you that that's a one-dimensional measurement. It's just a length. It's not length and width, 2 dimensions, or it's not length, width, and height, 3 dimensions. It's just a length, okay, just the measure of height. So that's what T represents. Yep, T is always a ratio of 1D over 1D. That's right, okay? So if you're struggling from here to here, it's probably algebra that's getting you, okay? That's usually what comes back to haunt you in geometry. The geometry part a lot of times will make sense, and then you put algebra with it and you're like, whoa, what just happened? I got lost. So just for this T right here, we made a substitution. We put this one-dimensional fraction in. Okay, so height 2 over height 1 is for the T. You still have to cube it. Okay? All right, so Dustin's working on it. He says, I think I know the answer. All right, let's see what we get. So remember, I'm going to create a new page so we can just have some room for our algebra. Let's see if Dustin's right. Do you want to write it out for us, Dustin? Do you want to write out what you did? I'll write out this part. If you don't want to, that's okay. But if you want to, all right, go for it. Go for it. Yeah, good question. So can you guys tell me how Dustin got this 13,824? That is correct. Yeah, and again, it's challenging your computation / algebra skills. You have to remember, okay, what are the rules that are allowed? If I have cubed and I have a fraction in there, what can I do? Yes, the cubed applies to both the 24 and the 30. So it's 24 cubed over 30 cubed. So if you type in 24 cubed, you get this number here, and 30 cubed gives you 27,000, okay? Good. Now these are some big numbers, but after this point, you guys have been practicing this quite a bit, so at least you can take a sigh of relief. You know what to do from there, right? I hope anyway, but you want to just cross multiply from this point. It gets a little bit easier after you cube the left. So you got to be real careful because you've done a big, huge number over here. So just be really careful not to, forget a number or something, because that will throw your answer off. But this is a part 2 test, right? What should you guys always do on a part 2 test? Are you going to write the answer for volume 2? Ah, thank you. Type that in caps. Please show all your work, okay? Because if you happen to leave the 8 out right here, I will look at your work and I will say, oh, darn it, they got the final answer wrong, but all they missed was that 8. They just forgot to transfer that onto paper, and that threw their answer off. And so guess what? For something as small as that, I would probably give you all the points, and I would just let you know, hey, by the way, you dropped the 8, but you had the right idea, okay? Here, like maybe let's say you cubed the 24, but you didn't cube the 30. I'd take off a point for that, but I'd say, hey, by the way, rule when you apply exponents is that you apply it to the numerator and the denominator, but otherwise, great job. Okay, so that, if you just give me 8,191, guess what? You miss all the points. Okay, so please show your work, because I try to, if you just mess up on something, I'll see where that happens and take off appropriate points, okay? So it's better than getting off, because most of these questions are worth usually at least 10 points is kind of the average for a part 2 test, okay? All right, now that's just part A, okay? So we got to still do B, C, and D. That's why we started early. So Monday we'll start reviewing for the rest of the test, but at least we'll get some of the part 2 out of the way. I think the rest of it maybe goes a little easier though once you find that scale factor. All right, so part B, the ratio of the area of the base of the smaller pyramid to the larger pyramid. Okay, now I cannot tell you how many times I will have students going back on part B and going back to t squared equals area 2 over area 1. And I totally see where you're going with that. That's a good thought, but it doesn't have to be that complicated, okay? And I think this word right here is where you guys get confused. What does ratio mean? Let's go back to that word. That might help you guys. And also I'm going to write down what we got here. Yeah, proportion. What else could you say? I'm looking for a word that starts with F. There you go. Amelia got a fraction. Okay, so ratio is another word for fraction. Okay, so keep in mind that's what this is looking for. It's looking for a fraction. Okay, and it tells you here what the fraction should be. It wants the area of the base of the smaller pyramid to the larger pyramid. So we want the area of the smaller over the area of the larger, and that's going to be our ratio. That's going to be our answer. Okay. One thing that's going to help us, let's get, let's see, volume 2, 8192, just from part A. Think of what we've learned so far. You definitely could, okay, so like I said, the ratio we've learned so far with your scale factor. That is true still. It's still going to apply here. But do you know the areas? I think this is where it gets tricky, because you're trying to think of that that proportion, which is true, but you kind of get bogged down in the details. I think that's where part B is tricky. So yeah, Anthony, you're right. We do not know the areas. So typically what students will do is they'll say, okay, well, I don't know those, so I better find them. And you can try to, except there's not quite enough information given in this problem if you try to find the areas. because we don't know like the dimensions of the base there. And so we can't quite figure out what is area 2, what is area 1. But the good news is for part B, because it seems like that's what you'd need to know. However, you don't though, because all we have to know is the ratio. We don't have to know individually what is A2, what individually is A1. We just have to know what that fraction would be equal to. So think to T. What do I know about T? Look up here at the top, the part I have in red. We know height 2 over height 1, right? Because we just used it for part A. So can you use that to tell me what the ratio of the areas is? I want you to think about this. Rather than finding the individual areas, how could we find just the ratio? What is area 2 over area 1? I don't need to know area 2 specifically. I don't need to know area 1 specifically. I just have to know if I made a fraction out of this, what would that fraction be equal to? Okay, and my hint to you is that it lies in T. How can we use T to get there? Okay, I think you're on the right track there, Nate. What do you mean by that? Solve it. What do we have to do with the 24 over 30? Okay, simplify, yes. I think you're on the right track. Not totally sure. You guys have to be a little more specific. Or go ahead and write it on the whiteboard. What would you, it might be easier just to write it. If you want What's a common factor between 24 and 30? Okay, 6 would go into each. So 24 divided by 6 is 4. And what about 30 divided by 6? 5. So 4/5 is actually the scale factor in simplest form. Okay, so that's part A. And then part D is the actual volume. Okay? All right. Let's go to some extra credit. Okay, so with all extra credit, what I actually want you guys to do is take a screenshot of your this online quiz and then put it into a Word doc and put it in the Dropbox that way. These directions are from last year. You could actually just copy it into the Dropbox directly and then the LMS changed and now you can't do that. So one extra step, but there's the link in the chat. So good luck on the extra credit. Have a good rest of your week. Let me know if you have any other questions on 3.11 through 3.12, and we'll talk more about the test next week. Bye, guys.